Hi everyone, this is Jessica, and I have been doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work for probably a good portion of the last 20 or so years, using what I would call kind of bad diversity techniques for at least the first decade, which eventually burnt me out as well as my audiences. And I tried to quit, can't quit, because all I can do is hold the fitted sheets and tell jokes about topics nobody wants to talk about. So I had to kind of reinvent diversity, equity, and inclusion work, which is what I have done. So I have combined my background as a stand-up comic, my years of working in diversity administration, primarily in universities, to create a new approach that I call Good Enough Now, that really takes doing what we can with what we already have some of the time, instead of waiting for perfect or to have all the information. Whether we're talking about a contentious topic or a challenging conversation or working across difference. And that's what I do, is Good Enough Now. When my trainings really first started, I was coming from one of my subordinated or marginalized identities. So I started talking primarily to heterosexual audiences about how to be an ally to us like LGBT folks. And what I eventually realized is that first off, LGBT folks would also be in the audience, because we're always kind of looking for community with one another and waiting to see what those straight people would do. And I didn't like that dynamic. I didn't like the dynamic that I was like setting up straight people to fail in an ally training. And eventually I began to adjust my approach to the work from my subordinated and marginalized identity as a queer person to actually being something that everyone in the room had in common. So I shifted it to more of a dominant or privileged identity. So what started as LGBT ally work really began to morph into anti-racism work, because most of the people in my audiences were white. So we were able to talk about how whiteness showed up in ally trainings within the LGBT community, as well as with straight folks. How do white people show up? So starting with whiteness, I then got to class and education level, literacy level, cisgender privilege. Even when I say that I identify as a lesbian, people know what that means. So what does that mean for fluid or pan or omnisexual people or asexual people? But being able to shift my work significantly from a dominant privileged place, instead of coming or organizing solely from a subordinated marginalized place, not only shifted my own energy and interest in doing DEI work, but it became significantly more effective working with my audiences from places of privilege, because, for lack of better words, we're no longer doing the work on a thriving, living basis, but we're actually able to do work at a much lower risk and at a lower cost in a safe environment, whatever safe means, from those places of privilege that then actually dismantle the systems of oppression that we were talking about originally. It completely overhauled my approach. When asked for advice to employers or even like directors of HR, when we're talking about pre-COVID or during COVID or whatever post-COVID might look like, I think what's important is to, one, maybe you even have to do this as a whisper, but your diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative more than likely was an extra add-on during a profitable period of time where your people felt, or people in leadership felt, that their bases are covered, so now we can go focus on this other thing. And then as soon as the bases didn't feel covered, it's the first thing that got cut. That's going to have a real impact on people who work and shop and consume and support your place of business, is that it's the first thing that got cut. And it's usually the first thing that got cut, similar to sustainability when we think about what we're doing for climate change, etc., is that whether we know it or not, and regardless of the murals painted on the wall, we're doing these things as add-ons because we don't actually see them themselves as profit drivers. We see them as things to do when we're being profitable. And until that shift happens, it's always going to be something extra. And these realities of the people you are recruiting or trying to retain to work in your place, as well as your customers and your clients, when the underskirting of your sustainability or your DEI initiative implies some kind of extraness, that's always going to keep them at an outsider position. No matter what your t-shirts say, what your website says, etc. We're going to have to figure out how to realize that we're going to need wildly different systems to actually combat climate change. We're going to need wildly different systems to combat racism and other forms of oppression. And I think COVID actually is the best teacher for this, because with very limited information, with very few best practices, no practice, and very limited resources in a very short period of time, collectively, globally, we have figured out a new way of running our business and living and thriving in our communities with little to no information. This isn't going to be a strategic planning, employee resource group, strategic committee kind of situation. It's going to have to be a complete overhaul of what you actually value as an organization and how diversity or sustainability fit into the values and the mission of your organization from go, not from extra. And now is the time to do it. I use humor in my work, in my stories, in my daily conversations at great risk and great reward. The risk is that I have to, as a comedian, as any stand-up comic, you have to pick and choose, like, are they ready for this? And then go 1 inch further. One of the things that we say in the stand-up comedy world is that you are constantly seeking failure. And by constantly seeking failure, you get comfortable with the uncomfortable. You get comfortable with the discomfort of a bomb, of like a bad choice, or maybe something you didn't think all the way out. And you're doing it in a setting where the audience is kind of expecting that. Now, a stand-up comedy set, right? Like, they've paid to come in the door. They've had a drink minimum. Remember when we went indoors and like did things together? They've done that with the expectation that they are going to be made uncomfortable. And the reward is that they're going to laugh. In the middle of a diversity training or in the middle of an interaction at a grocery store, you have not paid a cover fee with a drink minimum. You're not sitting at a little uncomfortable table in an uncomfortable chair waiting to laugh. You can still use humor as the great equalizer, but you need to be much more thoughtful and cautious of the choices that you're making as a humorist, because the setup isn't the same as a stand-up comedy place. Now, as an educator, I can use humor because I have practiced in front of audiences to know what actually can pull people together. And it's usually irony that's related to the humor that works. So the first step is to stop doing all the other first steps that you've always been doing because they're not working. If you think they're working, first step is to acknowledge, no, they're not. That's why you're still here. So that's step 1. Step 2 is, instead of adding, instead of tacking on or building new things or using resources or creating a dynamic where you're taking resources from A and giving them to B, what I would challenge you to do is 2 things. Have 2 really easy conversations that cost nothing, but you're not having these conversations. So the first one is, who have we invited to have this conversation? Who is not here, and why are they not here? Almost always what happens with the answer of this one is, well, the door's open. Yeah, so you've invited people in a way that doesn't actually feel like a real invitation. You've opened a door to a space that they don't actually feel like they're legitimately being invited to, so no one is showing up. So however you're doing that, you're gonna have to change. Who is not here and why? That'd be the first question. People don't want to have that conversation, so they're like, is there another option? Sure. So first choice B is not to have a conversation about who is included, because that is not working out great, but to have a conversation about who are you intentionally and unintentionally excluding. We have literally created an environment where we think we do not discriminate at all. And the truth is discrimination doesn't have to be discrimination. Discrimination can also be making a discriminating choice. When you sit down and actually have a conversation about who you are intentionally not including, what that means is you don't have resources for every single person. If I include everyone is invited to come to this meeting. That's not true. You don't even have enough chairs. You don't have a room big enough for everybody. Even if we talk about Zoom, there's a cap on how many people can come to this Zoom call. You cannot include everybody. So who are you intentionally including? Who are you intentionally excluding? Then you can get to who are you unintentionally excluding? And extra bonus is who are you unintentionally including? That guy, right? Like we're just waiting for him to quit, right? There's a lot of people that are included because you don't know how to kick them out. So you're intentionally including someone that you don't want to be there. You're intentionally including your target market, but you are unintentionally also including people that need to not be there, and you are unintentionally excluding folks. The best way to be able to do this kind of 4-part rubric is to pay attention to intentional and unintentional inclusion and exclusion. And what are you making conscious choices about? And when you get to what's typically referred to as these unintentional blind spots, your next job is to shut up and listen, because they've been telling you this all along. There are people who are definitely interested in your widget, but you are not reaching out to them because you're not even thinking about them. If you are truly driven by profits, you need to go through this rubric to figure out how you could better intentionally include the people that you are trying to, and how you can better intentionally exclude the people that you're wasting your money on. We get that from a marketing place, but we don't get that from who we invite to lunch place. That's the difference. Thank you to FitPros for creating a partnership, not just with human resources departments and DEI professionals like myself, but allowing resources and conversations to continue, whether we're talking about virtual or in person. These conversations need to take place regardless of whether they are virtual or not, because these conversations are actually taking place. Some folks need to catch up and really brush up on some skills around these conversations. And some folks have been waiting for you all along, and there they are, waiting for you to engage. Without the partnership with FitPros, I think a lot of human resources professionals would be trying to recreate the wheel within their own organizations. And instead of recreating the wheel, it's through partnerships, both external and internal, that you can foster real conversations and real listening. Remember, my parting advice would be that it doesn't have to be a problem that you've experienced to be a problem for someone else. And if someone's sharing something that you've never experienced, that's a gift. So listen to their experience that you've never experienced, because now you are aware that they're experiencing something that you never have. And now you can do something about it. And it's through those better connections that, at least my philosophy, is you can do the best you can with what you got some of the time, because that's better than nothing never. So that is being good enough now. Thank you.